Hi everyone, my name is Schiavone, and today I'm going to talk to you about adopting open science practices as an early career researcher. So as you may have guessed, I am an early career researcher. I'm a grad student at UC Davis and a member of the Meta Science Lab at the University of Melbourne, where I work with Samin Vizier. My research focuses on meta-science, perceptions of scientists, and attitudes towards science and religion. Today I'm talking to you about open science, which my interest in began to develop during my first year of graduate school. This came about for a couple of reasons. One, I was on Twitter and began to follow people who were talking about these issues, and I was fortunate to be able to attend a meeting of the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science. Now, through both of these things, I learned a lot about issues facing our field, including issues of replicability, reproducibility, and problematic research practices and incentive structures that are maintaining them. While this was disheartening, it was simultaneously exciting to realize that there was so much work to be done and that there were some solutions that, could address these issues. Through this, I met some amazing and passionate ECRs who were committed to doing science as best they could and who were all kind of questioning, how did we get here as a field? Why are so many of these studies failing to replicate? Why is it uncommon to post data, your materials? Why aren't we pre-registering our hypotheses? And why is running a replication study so controversial? Along with these questions were a lot of efforts and ideas about how to change these things, how to improve research in psychology. I also realized that, not everyone is as supportive or accepting of these efforts. And that, the system may not necessarily reward this work. This is perhaps not that surprising, given that I don't think that we ended up in a replication crisis by chance. So resistance to some of these reforms is perhaps to be expected. This can, however, create some roadblocks for ECRs who want to do open science. So today I'm going to be talking about these. I'm going to talk about the benefits of open science for early career researchers, the challenges they face, some of my own thoughts and experiences, and then briefly I would like to speak to undergraduates to faculty. First, I would like to talk about some of the benefits of open science and ways that it could help your career. First of all, open science can increase the visibility and engagement in your work. For example, things such as open access publications, sharing your data, your code, and your materials, posting preprints, and also registered reports have all been found to be associated with increased citation rates. Sharing this online can also perhaps facilitate networking and collaboration through online spaces. Open science can also help get you credit for the work that you have done beyond the traditional publication means, through things like documenting your contributions in materials such as preprints, posting your data, your code, and these are things that are tangible and that you can include on your CVs and your resumes. It can also help optimize your workflow through things like improving your documentation, increasing reproducibility of your findings, and also kind of facilitating easier reuse. So if, say, 3 years from now, someone emails you asking, hey, how did you do this thing for that experiment? Or can I look at your data? Instead of kind of digging through your files, you can point to a repository where these things are already stored and documented. Now, this can also help you develop skills that are valuable and translatable, both in academia and beyond. For example, programming, version control, and database management. Other benefits of open science include getting feedback, and often quicker than through the peer review process. This can be through posting a preprint or asking for feedback on Twitter. Things like registered reports can also help you to publish null findings. And lastly, open practices such as posting a preprint, sharing your materials or your data, allows you to control when you share your work. And in this way, you're not beholden to journals, in the sense that you don't have to wait for editors, reviewers. Other benefits of open science are perhaps a bit less tangible, but nevertheless I find meaningful. For instance, kind of increasing the confidence in your work, knowing that you're contributing to knowledge, resources that others can use in the future, and increasing the accessibility of science. Even kind of sharing one paper that is not behind a paywall, I think, contributes to this. Now, there are many benefits, but there are also, of course, challenges. These challenges include people finding errors in your work. Now, I include this as a challenge because obviously no one wants there to be errors in their work, and if someone were to find them and to point them out, that would kind of bound to be stressful, right? However, I do think this is also a benefit because if there are errors in my work, I want to know about them. And I think this is kind of a necessary component of asking people to trust us. If we want the public to trust us, we need to earn it. Now, a major challenge that DCRs face is limited time and limited resources. Grad school is not that long of a period of time to develop a CV that is extensive enough to be competitive on the job market. There are also limited resources, and this differentially impacts certain individuals. Now, this can mean things like research funding that allow you to recruit larger samples, to things like being the only person in your lab or even your department who is working with open science practices versus, say, if you're in a lab where these things are sort of the norm and already kind of established, that's going to be a lot easier. You may not be rewarded for this work. The incentive structures in psychology are a bit broken and have often kind of favored quantity over quality, and so this can be a problem. You may put a lot of work into something and that may not be valued as much as other things. For instance, if you conduct a replication study, this may not be valued as much as original research. Similarly, some people may not like you. Certain people in psychology are still resistant to these reforms, and I do think things are changing, but it does take time. Now, a huge challenge that ECRs face, I think, is that of power imbalances. And this is, of course, related to these previous points, but if you are working in a lab or your advisor or your PI is not supportive of open science practices, and these are things that you value and want to use, it is incredibly difficult. It's a hard position to be in, and I wish that I had a good answer. I'm not here to tell you that you just need to keep it up and eventually they'll come around. I do think that many faculty have kind of been influenced by their graduate students, but this is not always possible, and that's also a lot of work that you really shouldn't have to do. I do kind of encourage you that if this is the case, to try to look for collaborators and mentors outside of your own lab. I think the last 8 months have shown us that you don't need to be in the same place in order to collaborate productively and to get work done. So I think, reach out and try to find people if you're not getting the support that you need. Now, I want to talk a bit about my own experiences, reflections, and maybe some advice. So, one thing that I have found particularly frustrating that relates to these incentives that I was just mentioning is this culture of publish or perish, to where, early career researchers are expected to have extensive CVs filled with publications with so many first authored papers in journals XYZ. Faculty to get tenure similarly need to publish in high impact journals, and journals that, often are rewarding quantity over quality and kind of flashiness over kind of rigor. It's, really not surprising that we have problems with research quality, I think. This is not an environment in which researchers, I think, will thrive. And so one piece of advice that I've often heard and have been told myself is this idea of, just wait until you have tenure. I personally find this advice incredibly frustrating. I don't think that hard choices suddenly become easier once you have some job security. And I think unlearning problematic practices is harder than establishing them early. And another part of this is that, you can publish a lot, and with the current job market, you can still perish. And by perish, I simply mean not getting an academic job. Now, because, nothing is guaranteed, what I encourage you all to consider is don't wait until you have tenure to do the science that you want to do, to hold to your values. Don't compromise those values for a career or a job that may or may not exist. And I don't mean this to be disheartening. Rather, for me, this has been very empowering. At the end of my PhD, whether I have a job in academia or in industry, what I want is to be able to look back on the work that I've done, the research that I've conducted, and to feel proud and to think that, I contributed something with the opportunities that I had. Now, this is a bit gloomy, I will admit. We don't know what the future will hold. It's hard to say, especially now, what the job market will look like. Nevertheless, I do think that things are changing. This change is slow, but I think that we are at a fascinating point in the history of psychology where we are kind of have the opportunity to be at the forefront of these changes and to kind of shape the future of this field. And in this way, there's nothing special about open science. Open science is just good science. It's just doing the things that we, kind of would expect to lead to stronger evidence. Now, I want to mention a couple ways in which you can learn more about open science in addition to what you've heard before me. And some of these include joining Twitter. This sounds silly, but this is how I learn so much about the research that is emerging in our field, learning about preprints, learning about practices. It's a way to have kind of access to so many more people in a way that sort of levels the playing field, right? Anybody can respond to a tweet, whether they are an editor-in-chief or a first-year grad student. So I found it quite useful. Another thing I encourage you to do is to join a journal club, especially ones like Reproducibility. This is a network of ECRs who meet together, now virtually, to learn about open science. I also urge you to start small. Open science is not an all or nothing thing. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So consider your goals. Start where you can. You don't need to be an expert. And finally, keep learning, keep questioning. Undergrads. If I could go back to when I was in university, here's a couple of things that I would like to have told myself. 1, don't trust everything that you read or you hear. Just because something is published or in a textbook, it doesn't mean that it's right. And similarly, it's okay to question your professors, your TAs, and yourself. This is an important part of science. If you are interested in grad school, I strongly encourage you to start learning about replicability and some of these issues, which I'm sure you're already doing if you're watching this. I urge you also to talk to grad students. Ask them about these things. Ask what their experience has been like. It was not long ago when we were in your shoes. And finally, look for advisors who have similar values. Shared values matter so much in these kind of advisor-advisee relationships, and this can really kind of make or break your experience. So I urge you, if open science is something that's important to you, talk to them about it. Ask them how they feel about these issues, and also maybe look at the work that they're doing and whether their kind of statements are matching the things that they are doing themselves. Faculty. I hope some of you are watching this. I have a couple of recommendations and things to kind of urge you to do to support ECRs. First, don't make ECRs do all of the work. When it comes to the credibility revolution and reform efforts, this has largely been driven by ECRs. Now, it's been great, but at the same time, you can do your part as well. There's so much to be done, and ECRs have kind of a lot to deal with. Support the ECRs that you know, your grad students, those in your department. Listen to them. Listen to what they value, listen to their goals, and advocate on their behalf. And let your students chart their own course. If they want to pre-register their next study, let them. If they don't want to publish in certain journals, support that choice. And use your power for good. You have so much power whether you realize it or not, whether you have tenure or not, or at an R1 or not. So use it. Speak up in your department, your search committees, the journals that you edit at. You have the ability to directly influence the incentive structures. So talk with your colleagues. Ask what it is that your department values and rewards, and use your voice to push for quality over quantity and kind of rigor over impact. And if you are not willing to do this, then, move out of the way, please. I don't mean this to be harsh, but if you're not going to help, then I ask you to please don't make it harder for ECRs who are doing this work. Okay, some final thoughts and things that I have learned. 1, that experience does not equal wisdom, citations do not equal quality, impact does not equal evidence, and prestige does not equal knowledge. And I guess to sum this up, norms tell you what is expected, not what is right. There are a lot of norms in psychology that are being questioned right now, and that we can change. Just because it's the way it's been done does not mean it's the way that we should continue to do it. And so, I mean it when I say that open science is about the future, and I think it's one that we can make better, and I think you can be part of this. Thank you all for listening today. I hope you got something out of this talk. If you want to get in contact with me, you can find me on Twitter at Schiavone Says, or you can shoot me an email at schiavone@ucdavis.edu. Before I wrap up, I want to leave you with a list of resources if you want to learn more about open science. Reproducibility. This is a network of journal clubs, includes ECRs across the world. SciArchive is a preprint server for research in psychology. Riot Science Club has a YouTube channel where they post all of their presentations that are related to open science and meta-science. And finally, the Center for Open Science Framework, and the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science all have some great resources. I do want to thank my advisor Samin and my lab mate Julia, and everybody in the MetaMelb research group. Finally, if you would like to download a copy of this presentation, you can do so at this OSF link. Thanks for listening.